Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The title of the talk is Beyond the Relaxation Response, New Scientific Insights into Meditation. In 1975, Dr. Herbert Benson, an American cardiologist and now professor of mind-body medicine at Harvard School, coined the phrase the relaxation response to account for the changes in adrenaline, cortisol, blood pressure, etc., which occurred when people practiced meditation. Tonight's talk will look at what the relaxation response actually is and at the significant and exciting developments that have taken place in the field of contemplative neuroscience over the past 40 years. So to give you an overview of the talk, and at this point usually the audience have a big sigh of relief. It's only short. Well, if you remember, Jeff said I started it over 2 years ago, and I've been adding to it ever since. Every day. It's quite significant. But it's really to say, in the introduction, we will look at meditation, what is actually meditation, and then we'll look at what the relaxation response is. In the neurological insights, we'll look at changes in the brain, both in function and connectivity, and in structure. And in molecular insights, we'll look at the neuromolecules, genetics, and gene expression. So quite a lot to go at. The thing with meditation, it's all about verifying the claim. That's the really key point of this. Lots of claims are made for meditation, which Fortune.com claims is now $1 billion industry. So lots and lots of claims, but the important thing here is how far can science verify the claim? So we're going to start with a ridiculous claim. It's a great image, isn't it? Now, those of you who are philosophically minded are probably thinking, is it the story? Is it the story about the wise man and the parrot feigns death so it can be liberated? It could be that, but it's not. This is just about telling a big whopper of a lie. Many of you may be familiar with it. It's known as the famous parrot sketch. And John Cleese returns to the shop after buying a Norwegian blue. And it appears it's dead. And the shopkeeper, can you remember what he claims? He's just resting. Now you might be wondering why I started there. It's because I thought of that sketch when I came across this story. And this story it went viral. It went viral in 2015, early part of 2015, when I sat down to write this talk. So, and it's some of you may know what the story is about. It's a 200-year-old mummified Buddhist monk in the lotus position. And someone had put him up for sale on the black market because a thief had taken him from his resting place in a cave in Mongolia. So I began to think about this. I thought, well, just as we have a to-do list, does a thief have a to-steal list? It's a fair list, isn't it? But where is on that list? Where on the list, after you think about all the things you can possibly steal, where do you put a 200-year-old mummified monk? You got through jewellery, money, cars, antiques. Where is a 200-year-old mummified monk? I don't want you to work the answer out. But it did strike me as like, well, if someone is selling it, surely someone, for every seller there's usually a buyer, surely then someone must get up in this world one day and think, my life's incomplete. There's something missing. There's something missing. You know, and then they start thinking about what's missing. I'm thinking, you know, do they get to a 200-year-old mummified monk? Well, you'll be pleased to hear the police intervened, and the monk was returned to his former resting place. So it all ended well. But at that point, an expert on Buddhist meditation was quoted in the Times of India. This is what was said. And the reason I chose that sketch, this article really, is to illustrate why scientists are very sceptical about the claims made for meditation. When someone makes a claim like that, you know, scientists become very sceptical. Likewise, meditators are very sceptical about the objective proof demanded by scientists. So I had a quick look to see how many claims are made for meditation. And here's one website, 141 benefits, ranging from the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. It's quite extensive. Here are 32 of the 141. And just ponder them for a moment. And the question is, what can science verify? Because many of them are very attractive. I'd be in. If all of them are true, if all of them science can verify. And also, what are the physiological mechanisms? Now, before you even decide where to go with this, you have a very important question to answer. This is the key to it. What is meditation? That image, by the way, if you keep looking at it, you realise someone's really thought about it. They've got a meditation mat, they've got joss sticks, and they've got the ambient lighting. Because it's sort of everyone thinks that's meditation. That is what meditation is. Well, the answer is, strangely, it's not clear. It's not clear. Meditation is characterized in many ways. No consensus of definition of meditation, although all of them involve self-regulation of emotion and attention. So they all involve that. Jeff mentioned in his introduction Daniel Goleman and Richard Davison. This is how they define it. Meditation is a catch-all word for myriad varieties of contemplative practice. Just as sports refers to a wide range of athletic activities, for both sports and meditation, the end results vary on what you actually do. Elsewhere, they say all meditation practices fall into two paths, the deep and the wide. And those two paths are often confused with each other, though they differ greatly. What do they mean by the deep and the wide? They mean that meditation is simultaneously bound and separated from its spiritual, religious, and philosophical roots. The deep is for those wanting to explore the deeper aspects of man's nature through the discovery of being and unity, while the wide covers everything from the broader spiritual marketplace to healthcare, happiness, and well-being. Here is an attempt in 2010 to categorize all the different meditation practices. And it's by Fred Travis and Jonathan Shear. And they simply said, well, there's three major categories of meditation. And it's based on brain waves. The brain, as we'll see later on, is constantly producing waves. And they decided you could categorize all the different forms. So we've got focused attention, which has got gamma and beta waves, open monitoring, which is theta, and automatic self-transcending, which is based around the alpha waves. So what is focused attention? Well, as the name suggests, it's focus on one thing and one thing only. So it could be the breath going in and out of the nostrils, it could be an image, it could be a profound emotion. But you would focus on that, and when the mind drifts, as it inevitably does, you bring it back. What's open monitoring? Well, that's just simple as the name suggests. Instead of focusing down, you open out. And you have a sort of moment by moment awareness. But you don't actually concentrate on any explicit object. And the important thing here is you have a non-reactive monitoring. So any sort of mental idea or any sort of emotional feeling comes in, you do not react. Examples, I should mention of the first one, focused attention, loving kindness, compassion, and diamond way. And open monitoring, Vipassana meditation, and mindfulness meditation. Now just as you'll see, just in the bottom, is this automatic self-transcending. Automatic self-transcending just has one form of meditation in it. Transcendental meditation or mantra meditation. And it says it involves settling down of mental activity to a state of quiescence. It involves minimal cognitive control, said to be automatic or effortless. And of course, only one example there. Now, if you go, I went back to the original research to see this, because there's two papers involved in this. There's one from 2010, which is Fred Travis and Jonathan Shear, and there's one that came out in 2008 where there was only two categories. And you would find that something like transcendental meditation would be in focused attention. And then you discover that Fred Travis, he practices transcendental meditation, and he works for the Maharishi University of Management. And therefore, you've just got to be a little bit careful when you see people putting things into particular categories. Just got to be aware of seeing where they're coming from, and do they have a particular interest in a particular form of meditation. So I just thought I'd let you be aware of that. This is the tsunami that Jeff mentioned. This is a graph. There's quite a few graphs in this evening. This is a PubMed. It's run by the health authorities in America and the Library of Medicine. It's a free search engine. And I put the word meditation in. And I searched, went back to 1990 and made a graph of every single publication per year that mentioned meditation. And you can see just there, this is this huge wave going up here. If you go back to 1990, there were 22 papers that year published on meditation. If you go to last year, 2016, I think it was 406. 406 papers. Now that is only using the term meditation. If you put in compassion meditation and you include loving kindness meditation or you include other terms, you get about 1,000 in the English language. That means if I was to look at them all for this talk, I'd be reading 20 a week. It's too much. Too much. But it shows you that there's a huge amount of interest in it. A huge amount of interest. What do you get when you search for them? Well, what you get is this. The language is almost impenetrable at times. Intensive meditation training, immune cell telomerase activity, and psychological mediators. The bottom one, relaxation response induces temporal transcriptome changes in energy metabolism, insulin secretion, and inflammatory pathways. Now, I chose these two in particular because they're of interest. Here is Elizabeth Blackburn. These are all the researchers. Here's Elizabeth Blackburn, and she is a Nobel laureate. She won the Nobel Prize in 2009 for medicine and physiology, a joint winner, of course, for her work on telomerase and telomeres. And the bottom one is significant because here he is, aged 78, still doing cutting-edge research. This paper got a write-up on the BBC, New Scientist, all the papers. And there's Herbert Benson, still doing research. So here we are. We go right back to where it all started in 1975. And this is his #1 bestseller. It's been 4 million copies sold, translated into 13 languages. Now, at the time when he started doing this research, he was classed as a heretic. He says, stress makes us ill. Just 40 years ago, stress makes us ill, and he's a heretic. You know, no one really took it seriously. Do you know what started him off? White coat hypertension. You know, when you nip down to see the doctor, they used to wear white coats, didn't they? And if you had your blood pressure taken, it tended to go up. And he was interested in that. He thought, well, why does that happen? How is that? And he suggested to his superiors at Harvard that he do some research on that. They suggested he take the equivalent of his P45, whatever it is there. I don't know what it is. But anyway, he was going to be out of a job, but they didn't throw him out of a job. And he went to work with monkeys. That's what he went to work with. And by rewarding monkeys, he managed to get them to put their blood pressure up. Just by simply rewarding them, they could be coaxed into giving themselves hypertension. And that's where it all started. And he's been working in this field ever since. At that point, he was approached by people who practice transcendental meditation. They approached him and they said, we think we have low blood pressure. Do you want to experiment with us? It's a good offer, isn't it? And lo and behold, his superiors said, no, fine with the monkeys, but don't go anywhere near them. Luckily, he persevered. So really, what did he discover? He discovered the relaxation response. That's what he discovered, that the body has this natural capacity to relax. It has to be invoked, but it's a bit like having an accelerator, which is stress. Stress response is an accelerator. Well, you know, reason suggests then there must be a brake somewhere. There's got to be a brake. You know, you won't get in a car with just an accelerator. Think, well, where's the brake? Well, the brake is the relaxation response. And this summarizes it all. It's in the stress response, heart rate, blood pressure, glucose, muscle tension, cortisol, noradrenaline, and rate of aging. They all shoot up. And in the relaxation response, they all come down. So it's really simple. And what's strange about this, I mean, it seems to be all focused around Harvard, but 50 years prior to the relaxation response being discovered in a particular room, and it was the same room, by the way, Walter B. Cannon had discovered the stress response. So Herbert Benson and Robert Keith Wallace, in the identical room, the same room, discovered the relaxation response. Something in the brickwork at Harvard. If you want to know a little bit about the science of it, here's a diagram, and it shows all the nervous system and all the major organs. And you can see they're all linked together through this complex web of nerve endings. And it's mediated through what's called the autonomic nervous system. And it controls physical processes like digestion. So today I haven't felt like eating much, because my mind kept jumping ahead to this evening. And that's how it does it. It instantly affects things like digestion. A little bit of stress, and you put off your food. I'll make up for it tomorrow. I promise you. There are two main divisions to this. The sympathetic nervous system on the left, that's the fight or flight. And the one on the right is the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the rest and digest. And really the fight or flight response really is all to do with threat. It's all to do with threat. So if a wild animal comes through that door, if it comes through that door, luckily I'll be the first to see it. And my stress response will click in. It's already slightly up. You'll see it really take off. And I'll disappear somewhere through that door. That's where I'll go. And then your stress response will kick in and you'll follow me. Because it's all about getting ready for injury. It's an evolutionary process by which the body says, okay, I need energy. These muscles need working. I need energy, give me energy. I might get cut. Make my platelets sticky so I can, if I get cut and I'm going to bleed, make sure my blood's a bit stickier than normal. So it's an instant thing. It's for an immediate threat, but that's all it's meant to be. It's an accelerator when you need it, get you out of trouble. What you don't want is the foot to the floor all the time, which in this modern age, it seems that's what we do. We have the foot to the floor. And luckily, there is this relaxation response through the parasympathetic nervous system, but it needs to be invoked. You have to press the pedal. And the good thing is that meditation seems to do that. All these meditation techniques, many of them, not all of them, but many of them, invoke parasympathetic activity. So we're now on to the neurological insights. So the introduction's done. Neurological insights. And this is probably the most fascinating thing I read about. I didn't quite understand it when I first came across it in the literature, because they don't let you into the club. You're either in the club and you've worked your way up, but they're not going to explain everything to you simply. I kept coming across this default mode network, and thankfully if you get the book by Dan Goleman and Richard Davidson, it's all explained in there really simply. And it's a network of interacting brain regions that are commonly shown to be active when a person is not focused on the outside world. So if you've drifted off, you probably haven't, but if any of those drifted off while you're here, you will have brought in the default mode network. You'll have gone off to some island somewhere daydreaming. And it's a natural thing. It was only discovered in the 2000s, early 2000s, that there is this part of the brain that sort of is always active if you don't connect. And it was discovered because what happened was when someone was given a task to actually do something that meant giving attention, instead of these areas, say, changing their activity, they actually deactivated. They stopped. So give yourself something to attend to, and this part of the brain switches off. And now, that, if you look at it, doesn't really say anything. You'll see in a minute what it actually does mean. If you look at the brain, it's 2% of the body's mass, but it uses 20% of its metabolic energy. And it's always using a constant amount of oxygen. So it seems to be that the brain is naturally, unless you give it something to attend to, it tends to do this. This is a default page. dominated by the past and future. Is it recognisable? Just ponder it for a minute. You can add your own sentences. No. By the way, I'm not like this. I've a friend who's like this. It's interesting, in a 2010 paper from Harvard, they concluded, they said, the human mind is a wandering mind, and a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. That's a top-level research paper. They went on to say the ability to think about what is not happening is a cognitive achievement that comes at an emotional cost. The default mode network is being indicated in anxiety, stress, and depression. The good side of it is that it's now been recognised that things like meditation dampen down the default mode network. It allows it to be brought under, should we say, control. It was surprising that it was only in 2000, the early 2000s, that it was discovered, because the idea that the brain is constantly active was clearly expressed by Hans Berger in the 1930s as a result of experiments involving EEG devices. So we're going right back to the early studies of the brain. And he's very happy, isn't he? I don't think I'd be that happy if they put all them electrodes on my head. The human brain emits little signals, little electrical signals, because the nervous system is all about electrical movements, moving of charges. So it's conducting electricity, really. And you can detect that. And they're all at different frequencies. And those different frequencies correspond to different sort of, shall we say, features of the mind. So at the top, you've got gamma, which is 40 to 50 hertz. And that means 40 or 50 brain waves every second. So every second there's 40 or 50 brain waves. And that's usually associated with problem solving or concentration. Beta, 13 to 39 hertz, busy active mind. Alpha, that's 8 to 12 and it's very restful. And theta, 4 to 7 hertz, relaxation or drowsiness. And finally, you've got delta, which is 0.5 to 3.5 hertz, sleep or dreaming. During ordinary waking consciousness, EEG patterns are generally scattered. So this is an everyday, disorderly, rapidly changing pattern of the human brain. What happens in meditation, this is TM, you get a thing called coherence. They call it brain coherence. And I better explain this. The electrodes are on the back, the middle, and the front of the head. And what you've got here is an 8-second window along the bottom. And if you've got an 8-second window, you can see that's representing 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you count the number of waves in there, you get about 8 waves. So those who are listening, what type of wave is that? It's alpha. It's alpha waves. And what's also interesting about it is that where you see all the peaks, they all line up. And where you see all the troughs, they all line up. There's what's called synchrony. And if it happens over a huge area of the brain, they call it coherence. And it's generally recognised that it's a good thing. It's a good thing to have coherence. Correlates with high levels of intelligence and competence. Reflects brain efficiency. It's working in harmony. And successful managers and elite athletes often show brainwave coherence. Originally, when they tried to research the Tibetan monks, they used to cart all their equipment up to Tibet. And the Dalai Lama had sent these monks a letter saying, please entertain these gentlemen and let them do their studies on you and so on. It found that eventually it was better to bring them over to America, to their labs, and investigate them. This is a study from 2004. It's an EEG study, a control group consisting of healthy students with no experience of meditation, was compared with long-term Buddhist practitioners. Both groups were asked to generate a state of unconditional loving kindness and compassion. So that's what they were asked to do, to meditate on a loving kindness and compassion. During each meditative session, 30 seconds block of resting activity and 60 seconds block of meditation were recorded 4 times in succession. If I refer to the graph here, you'll see there's the resting phase, and even in the resting phase, they're quite extraordinary, some of these monks. They produce gamma waves, gamma activity, even in their resting. And then this is described here at 45 seconds. This is described as off the scale. When the researchers first saw this, this was something completely new. No normal or average brain does this. It can't do it. It doesn't have it. They thought they were witnessing something profound. And the relaxation response doesn't explain it either. The contrast between the monks and the controls in intensity of gamma was immense, both resting and during meditation. In functional magnetic resonance imaging studies of the brain, one of the monks had 700 to 800% jump in activity in the circuitry which is associated with empathy. So their brains are becoming hardwired. They're changing the way their brains work through their practice of loving kindness, compassion, meditation. This paper has been cited over 1,200 times. If you go and look in the book, Science of Meditation, he said there, and it was only just published in September, they said it was cited 1,100 times. So it's gone up 100 times in 2 months. So it's obviously a significant paper. I mentioned hardwired. Many medics will be familiar with this. Neurons that fire together wire together. And neuroscientists are fond of saying this. It's called Donald Hebb law, or Hebb's law. Mental states become neural traits. So our mental states become neural traits. Day after day, your mind is building your brain. During any experience, large groups of nerve cells fire all at the same time. The bonds connecting the firing nerve cells become enhanced. If the experience is repeated, the firing is also repeated and the connections tighten further. Neurons that fire together, wire together, describes what's now known as neural plasticity. So it's a great change in looking at the brain. I remember when I was young, the idea is you had a fixed number of brain cells, and as you got older, they all disappeared. They got less. And I was quite happy with that up until recently. And everyone else was as well, you know. Even the people, it's well known, documented, that because everyone believed that you couldn't have neurogenesis, you couldn't create new brain cells, and they didn't do any of this plasticity, even though they could see that it was there, they couldn't see it. So the fact that the brain can produce new nerve cells, because people have been told, no, they don't, even though the evidence was there, they couldn't see it. So, is there evidence? Is there evidence for this happening in people who practice meditation? Well, here we are, 2005. This is Sarah Lazar, again a researcher associated with Harvard. And she was looking for something to do, to dedicate her sort of scientific career to. And she'd been training for the Boston Marathon, and she developed an injury. And someone said, go along to a yoga class, because you need to do some stretching. So she went along to the yoga class, and the yoga teacher told her all about these stretches and so on. And then she said to her, you will become more compassionate. Which Sarah Lazarus said, yeah. She said, you'll be more open-hearted. You'll be able to put up with them awkward so-and-sos better at work that you can't stand normally. You'll be able to accommodate them better. To which she thought, no way. Yeah, sort of dismissing it. And in her own words, she discovered that while she did this yoga, she did become more compassionate. She felt more open-hearted, and she was able to deal with situations better than she had previously been able to deal with them, and people as well. So she was fascinated. So she went to the literature, and this is where it all started for her. What is happening when people take up things like these contemplative exercises. So she scanned 20 meditators and 20 non-meditators. And the meditators have been meditating for 9 years for about an hour a day. And she looked at 2 areas of the brain. She looked here at the prefrontal cortex, and she looked here at the insula. And the cortex is the outermost surface of the brain. Most recent evolutionary part, carries out higher cognitive executive functions like judgment, and it's involved in working memory. The insula, this integrates sensation and emotion, important for empathy and love, essential for self-awareness. What she discovered was quite remarkable, really. If I just talk you through this, can everyone see that? Here's the insula, and she's got the meditators there, and you've got the control group there. And generally, someone's put a line of best fit in. So for the meditators, whatever age you look at, their insula is thicker at any one stage compared to the non-meditators. And if you look at the rate of thinning of the insula for the meditators, it's less than the rate of thinning for the actual non-meditators. They're called the control, by the way. And likewise, in the prefrontal cortex, quite dramatic decrease for the non-meditators. Control group, meditator groupers seem to keep in quite a constancy of thickness. She describes it as having a brain of someone who would be 20 years younger for some people. Now, it's early days. It's very early days with this research. There was only 20 people participating in it. Statistically, you would have to do this many, many times over. And people are repeating these studies to see if it's true. But it seems to be that, and it went viral again, these stories all over the web, that if you want a thicker brain, meditate. I don't think they put it quite like that. But you get the drift, don't you? And she was amazed, really. And what do you think the science community said of it? The greater science community. Do you think they went, fantastic? No. They were really sceptical, as usual. Some things like along the lines, well, they're a bit weird. People who meditate, they're weird. They are weird, aren't they? They are. Come on. They're weird, right? That's first. Next minute, they burn joss sticks. All them fumes. You never know. Could be something to do with that. Loose-fitting caftans. These are all my prejudices, by the way. And they're vegetarians. How do you know it's not something they're eating that's done this, that's brought up the difference? So now you've got to think like a scientist. So here's it. You've done some research. You've presented it to the wider science community, and they've come back with, well, we don't believe you. What would you do next as a scientist to say, this is what we're going to do? You've got to think like a scientist. Think about it. Take people who've never meditated, get them to do some meditation, scan their brains beforehand, get them to do some meditation, and then scan them afterwards. Because they knew that if you take a London taxi driver, or you take someone who's juggling, going to take up juggling, and you do these tests with them, the areas of the brain that are involved in spatial and memory and so on, measure their brains beforehand, measure them afterwards, they change, they get bigger, they get thicker. So they knew that, the London taxi driver, before the sat-nav came in, the knowledge. They could be tested, and it was obvious that it changed their brains. So here we are, this is Hosel. Take a group which no one meditates, study the hippocampus, which is associated with memory and spatial. Hippocampus is the area of the brain that, when dementia, something like Alzheimer's, it's one of the first areas to undergo degradation. Previous studies have included jugglers and London taxi drivers, I've said. She studied how 8 weeks of mindfulness-based stress reduction affected grey matter density. Grey matter is the part of the brain that holds most of the brain cells. Increased grey matter density may reflect an increase in connectivity. For the current study, magnetic resonance images were taken of the brain structure of 16 study participants 2 weeks before and after they took part in the 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program. And it's pretty obvious. Here's the controls. They didn't undergo any of the mindfulness-based stress reduction. And here are the mindfulness-based reduction participants. A very significant increase in grey matter concentration. So, it was also seen in other areas of the brain involved in self-awareness, compassion, and introspection. So then Sarah Lazar came back with those people, and they did a psychological well-being test on them. So here is it's a standard test to get psychological well-being. They simply make a statement and you have to number it. So it might go something like this. When you have to give a talk in public, how often are you nervous? And you can say never, or you can say always, or sometimes, and you can score it. You can give it a score, and then out of that you'll get your psychological well-being. They've got various questions by which they can do that. So it's very clearly scientific. And what this is showing is here is a change in grey matter concentration and the change in psychological well-being going up. So you can see a clear relationship between the two. Hosel, again, looked at the amygdala. Some areas of the brain connected with executive functions get bigger. In contrast, do some areas get smaller? That's what they were trying to find. So here's an MRI scan of meditators. Have shown that brain's fight or flight center, the amygdala, appears to shrink. This primal region of the brain is associated with fear and emotion. As you go down through the brain and you move away from the front, you get older parts of the brain. We share them with many, many other animals. And the amygdala is one of those areas that we share. In this study, 26 stressed individuals. In this study, 26 stressed individuals participated in an 8-week mindfulness stress reduction intervention. A decrease in volume of grey matter in the amygdala, a key stress responding region, correlated with a reduction in perceived stress. And again, I better explain this because I have to change the wording on this graph. Can you see the size of decrease in perceived stress? The graph looks confusing because of the numbers. What that means there is that this person, this one here, had a decrease of 20. So say they had a score of 40 originally, it's gone down by 20 points. And it corresponds with a decrease in grey matter in the amygdala. It's gone down by about somewhere in the region of about 8%. 8% decrease, and they're saying that they've got a near enough a 20 points difference in their perceived stress. which is quite interesting. And if you look at this one as well, here this person, they're saying they had a -10, which means it's gone up by 10. Their score has gone up. And likewise, the area of their amygdala seems to have increased. So again, a definite correlation between decrease in the amygdala and a reduction in the perceived stress. So the evidence is building quite firmly. This is some of the earliest research. We're coming into molecular insights. This goes right back to the earliest studies. Some of the earliest studies were done on some of the molecules in the body that are associated with stress and so on. With molecular insights, you obviously get molecules. For the purist in here, and I've put them there. People get a little bit fearful when they see things like that. Basically, wherever you see a little change in an angle, it's just a little carbon atom. So all of this structure, although it looks very elaborate, is mainly carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. About 93% of the elements in our body are that. Just those three elements, 93%, of which 50% water, H2O. Cortisol is a steroid hormone associated with stress. When used as a medication, we know it as hydrocortisone. It's produced in the adrenal gland and is released in response to stress and low blood glucose concentrations. Short-term increase in cortisol response to stress may be helpful. However, chronically elevated levels damage blood vessels and raise lipid levels. Dr. Jevning and colleagues at the University of California measured cortisol levels for people while they practiced transcendental meditation and compared them with a control group. So really quite self-explanatory. This is before the meditation, during and after. And here's the control. There doesn't seem to be any change whatsoever. And yet for the person practicing transcendental meditation, quite a significant drop. Obviously then it recovers, but it never goes back to where it originally was. And when they've studied these people over a long period of time, the longer they've been meditating, the more pronounced that reduction in cortisol is. And it's also true for many other things like adrenalines. So lots of evidence. Serotonin. Again, serotonin, a neurotransmitter, it's thought popularly to be a contributor to the feelings of well-being and happiness. Again, you can see it's some early research, 1976, again, before, during and after. Here's the control, very little change, quite a significant increase for the person or people practicing meditation. Melatonin, I thought I'd change the typograph, just to wake everyone up a bit. The most significant thing here, this is from 2004, it's a hormone that regulates sleep. So it regulates sleep, wakefulness, and the synchronization of circadian rhythms. That's the 24-hour clock. In this study, plasma melatonin concentrations were measured before and after 1 hour of meditation in advanced male meditators. They were compared with a matched reference group who rested for 1 hour. The most significant thing here, I think, is this. This was done early in the morning, which melatonin will start to decrease. It'll increase in the evening. Just before we go to bed, it should be at its highest. So off to sleep we go. It will start to decrease in the morning. The meditators, all of them, seem to have significant higher levels of melatonin than the non-meditators. This was after 1 hour of meditation. It seems to have gone down. I don't know why they did it, but they asked the people who meditate to meditate for 3 hours. And then they concluded, we don't know why their melatonin decreased so considerably. This could not be explained. Likewise, I think the most significant is the first bit. Dopamine. Dopamine, a neurotransmitter critical to central nervous functions such as movement, pleasure, attention, mood, and motivation. It's got a lot of work to do. And these are binding studies. This is 8 male meditation teachers spent 72 minutes listening to recorded speech, and then another 72 minutes guided meditation practice. They were both done in the same voice. Radioactively labelled raclopride was injected and a PET scan of the brain taken. Now, you really need to know how this PET scan works to really understand it, but it's a marvel of modern physics. I'm gobsmacked at how it works. It involves quantum mechanics and relativity. Because what they do, to get this image, the little radioactive particle they put in releases an antimatter, a little particle of antimatter, a positron, which collides with your brain. And of course, your brain's made of matter, and antimatter and matter don't get on. They annihilate each other in a burst of energy, and they get turned into pure energy. And of course, we have that famous equation, E equals mc squared. And that's what's happening there. This burst of energy, its gamma rays come hurtling out through the skull, pass through the skull. And what's happening in here is the raclopride that's been radio-labelled with a carbon atom, it's been radio-labelled, emits the little antiparticle. And the raclopride itself competes with dopamine. It competes with dopamine for the dopamine receptors. Now, what that means is this, is that if there's a lot of dopamine, very little of the raclopride combined. So if there's a lot of dopamine, very little raclopride combined, and therefore you'll get a weaker signal. If there's very little dopamine, lots of raclopride will bind, and you'll get a much stronger signal. So now you can understand this, why this is significant. You can see this is the stronger signal, this is the speech. Therefore, the dopamine levels are lower. More raclopride is binding. In this one, you can see much less signal coming out, less gamma rays are coming out, and therefore there's more dopamine. And it's been measured that is about 65% increase in dopamine from the people who are meditating compared to the control group. And all the people in that meditation group indicated that they felt relaxed. They didn't feel like they wanted to do any activity whatsoever. And why this is significant, this study, is that it's shown that this is a conscious state being shown up at the synapse. So where this is all taking place is where one nerve cell ends and another nerve cell starts, and you're witnessing meditation affecting that area in terms of neurotransmitters. This is a very exciting field. This is telomeres. Telomeres. This is a image of the nucleus of a cell. And in there are all the chromosomes, and all the chromosomes have little shoelace endings on them, little caps. And the caps are there to protect them. Okay? Now, often DNA gets damaged, it gets broken, and inside every cell there's mechanisms to repair those breakages. So you can imagine that if you didn't have these little caps on, the cell might think it's broken. I'll try and repair it. Well, you don't want to do that to the integrity of a chromosome. So it has these little caps, and there's all sorts of other reasons why it has the caps. It allows the chromosomes to be replicated, to be copied. So they have these little caps on them, and they're very significant because they think they're all to do with aging. They think they're to do with aging. Why we age. We age at the cellular level. As we age, the telomere gets shorter, so limits tissue renewal and may be associated with age-related diseases. So you can see here, this is for lymphocytes, which are white blood cells, and you can see that these are the age along the bottom, and here's the telomere length up the side. From birth to about 5, a very rapid decrease. The telomere, the cells are replicating, dividing, and the telomere is getting shorter and shorter. Then we go through a period of stability from up to about 25, just when we feel things are going for us. And then unfortunately, it's all downhill after that. About 30. That's it. I could end there, but I won't. Let you ponder that. I'll explain what's actually happening. Here is a chromosome, here's the little telomere, and here's one cell. One cell become two cells become four, they become 8. And what's happening with the telomere, you can see a little bit's being taken off each time, to the point when you reach there, there's no telomere left, and the cells go into what's called senescence. They no longer divide, they stop. A lot of them forget what they're meant to be doing. So it's just hang around. They got a big write-up in the paper last week. It was look it up, but it was about senescent cells and the two options we have. We either build a lot of senescent cells up or we get cancer. And they were saying mathematically it's one or the other. I don't know whether everyone saw that article. It was quite interesting. But they just stop doing what they should be doing. And they reach old age. And some of them die and some of them just stop dividing. Now, this is the cheery bit. This is what Elizabeth Blackburn got her Nobel Prize for, because she discovered an enzyme called telomerase. And telomerase, well, what it does, it basically sticks back on a little bit of the telomere, puts it back on. So what you've got here is a chromosome length, here's the telomere. With a normal replication, notice the telomere gets shorter. When you've got telomerase present, it sticks a little bit of extra on to allow for the fact that it's been cut off. So it's been cut off and here's a bit more being put back on. And if you look at this diagram here on the top, you'll see that without telomerase, the telomere on the chromosome gets shorter and shorter. With telomerase, it's preserved. So, what did Elizabeth Blackburn's team do? Well, she attempted to investigate meditators and telomerase. In this study, Tonya Jacobs, which included Elizabeth Blackburn, measured telomerase activity in participants of a 3-month intensive meditation retreat. Investigated whether purpose in life was influenced by meditative practice and did consequential changes in perceived control and neuroticism influence telomerase activity in immune cells. So it's a big, big study, this. I'll just explain what's happening. Here's a meditative practice. You become mindful, you get mindfulness, you get purpose in life, and you get perceived control, and that increases telomerase activity. That's one of the things they were proposing. And likewise, if you've got emotional negativity, you've got neuroticism, that decreases telomerase activity. So this was the model they were working with. And according to Centers of Disease on Control and Prevention, 50% of Americans, apart from jobs and family, have no strong feeling of any purpose in life. That's how they claim, that's a study. Viktor Frankl explains in Man's Search for Meaning how having meaning and purpose in life enable people to survive years in concentration camps. The retreat group meditated for 6 hours daily for 3 months, that's 540 hours, and were compared with a control group that did not. And here are the results. The telomerase activity in the immune cells was measured. Telomerase was 30% more active in retreat participants than in members of the control group. And that activity was still present 5 months later. So still present 5 months later. This would have had implications for telomere length and immune cell longevity. They could directly as well say that telomerase activity was definitely to do with the purpose in life, having a purpose in life, and having perceived control. That there was a link. Now, they do say that further studies are needed, obviously small numbers. You need to do this several times, build up the evidence. It's a big study. Goldman and Davison say of these findings, it's as though the body cells were saying, stick around. You've got important work to do. It's a nice way of putting it. Now, if 3 months, 6 hours a day meditation seems too much, how about 12 minutes daily for 8 weeks? Does that sound attractive? Now, this is a meditation or relaxing music. This is a study involving meditation and relaxing music for 12 minutes daily for 8 weeks. It was a study for 39 mildly depressed, elderly caregivers of dementia patients. On average, the incidence of prevalence of clinical depression in family dementia caregivers approaches 50%. Currently, at least 5 million Americans provide care for someone with dementia. The prevalence of dementia and the number of family caregivers will increase dramatically over the next 2 decades. If you want to look at how much it costs us, 2010, 1% of GDP went on dementia care. That's 604 billion US dollars. That's the equivalent of the 18th largest economy, and at that time that was Turkey. So the whole of the GDP of Turkey going into dementia care. So in this study, those who meditated had significantly greater improvements in depression and mental health, and their telomerase activity increased again by 30%. So here's the relaxation group, pre and post. Their actual telomerase activity went down. And for the meditation group, it went up, and that's been calculated at 30%. I find it reassuring that you don't have to go on a 3-month, 6-hour a day. People say, are they your holiday snaps? I said, where do you think I go on holiday? It's part of the science. It was written originally, this talk, for an Australian audience. And when I put it up, I said, why is she here? You know, he said, does she meditate? I couldn't think of a clever answer. I just said no. It was after when I thought, you know, well, she's got limited Sanskrit. You know, bar. But I thought, I'm not going all the way back to Australia to say, by the way. But who is she? She's Dolly. She's Dolly, yeah. I mean, I've put a low in, so it's obvious. But it's the naming of her that's interesting. I mean, usually someone knows all of this. She was cloned from a mammary cell, right? And therefore, she was called Dolly after Dolly Parton. That's it. If you watch Big Bang Theory, that's the comedy. Raj and Howard and Leonard, if they cloned the sheep from a mammary cell, they'd call her Dolly. That's the sort of nature that was going on. He admits it. Those scientists at the Roslin Institute just say, yeah, you know, that's why we named it. What age does a sheep, what age are they expected to live to? 5 minutes? Are we going to get through all this? I don't know. We're going to have to speed up a little bit. They lived to about 12. Dolly lived till 6. And she was cloned from a 6-year-old. And her telomeres, it appears, were very, very short. She had arthritis. And therefore, she had a disease at the age of 6. She had like an old age disease. So they thought that she got somehow, that she was already 6 when she was born. Just to move on a little bit quicker. The science always moves on. They were worried at that stage that maybe you couldn't clone things. You'd have to be careful at the age of cell. What the scientists have done, this is Debbie, Denise, Diane and Daisy, born in 2007, and their telomere lengths are okay, they're fine. And all sorts of other animals they've cloned as well recently to show that this doesn't affect telomere length. I thought it was a nice little side story to the telomere story. Back to the meditation, this is gene expression, probably the most exciting field at the minute. Gene expression is the process by which information contained within genes becomes a useful product. In this study from 2008, gene expression changes triggered by meditation were studied. So you had 19 long-term, it says RR, they're meditators, relaxation response, 20 controls, they didn't do any meditation. Well, for the purpose of this tonight, they didn't do any meditation. The actual research is a little more detailed than that, but for this example, I've left out the rest of it. And they looked at their gene profiles, and something very significant, expression is quite different. This is the non-meditating group, this is the meditating group, and as you come down here, each little square is a person, so there's about 20 people in that group and about 20 people in that group, and what you see is that where it's red, there's a high expression of a gene, and where it's green, there's a low expression of a gene. And instantly you can see between the meditators and the non-meditators, there's a clear visual difference. Statistically, this is a quick statistical way of analysing gene expression. Where it's red, it tends to be green, and vice versa. Where it's red down here, it tends to be green there. And what that was significant is that it was to do with they were being able to control oxidative stress within the body. This could manage oxidative stress in the body, this gene expression that the meditator is showing. 2,209 genes were differentially expressed by the meditators compared to the non-meditators. Oxidative stress is essentially an imbalance between the production of free radicals and the body's ability to deal with those harmful effects. So a very significant find. This is another study. Bass and et al. Analysed 26 volunteers. They were taught a meditation technique. Techniques lasted 10 to 20 minutes, reciting words and breathing exercises. After 8 weeks, beneficial genes had become more active, harmful ones less so. Boosted genes include the efficiency of mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, boosted insulin production, improving the control of blood sugar, preventing the depletion of telomeres, and some of these changes happened in minutes. So some of these changes are very significant. As soon as you start to meditate, these changes start to occur. Clusters of genes that became less active were governed by a master hub called NF-kappa B. NF-kappa B is involved in many, many diseases. It's a hub gene, and it's connected with things like cancer, heart disease, diabetes, allergies, asthma, arthritis, and so on. The ones in the green boxes, there seems to be good evidence for. The ones that are not in the green boxes, there's some evidence, but it's not as conclusive. But it shows that it's affecting this important gene, or hub gene. This is Kalaman. Kalaman looked at epigenetic changes, it's the buzzword, epigenetics. 19 experienced, this study investigated the effects of a day of intensive mindfulness, just a day, practice in a group of experienced meditators compared to a group of untrained control subjects who engaged in quiet meditative activities. The researchers said there were no difference in the tested genes between the two groups at the start. So no difference at the start. After 8 hours of mindfulness practice, the meditators showed a range of genetic and molecular differences, including epigenetic changes with altered levels of gene-regulating machinery and reduced levels of pro-inflammatory genes, which in turn correlated with faster physical recovery from stressful situations. What they did there was give them a stress. They made them stress by asking them to speak in public. And then they say, here's 1,173, take 13 off that, take 13 off that, and you stand before an audience and do it in your head. You will be stressed. And then they measure it to show how stressed you are. This is the final study. I thought it was significant. This is Creswell in 2016. It's not quite, they didn't look at gene expression, but obviously it's all connected because they looked at pro-inflammatory cytokines in the body. It was a double-blind, randomized control trial. When it's double-blind, it means the people participating in it don't know what they're in, what they're doing, and the people doing the measuring don't know what group they're in. This is a very significant study To tell someone they're doing mindfulness, they think they're doing mindfulness, but they weren't doing mindfulness. I'm not quite sure how they did it, but they did it. And they simply, although the study, all invited to a 3-day retreat and divided into 2 groups. One group went left down the corridor to the mindfulness-based stress reduction program. The other went right to the relaxation program. And of course, they didn't know which group they were in. The mindfulness-based stress reduction consisted of mindfulness training. The relax program included similar activities, but the mindfulness was left out. That's the key to it. They left the mindfulness aspect out. What did they find? The blood samples showed that the participants who underwent the mindfulness training had lower levels of interleukin 6, a biomarker of inflammation, than those who did the relaxation retreat. So a significant difference. The researchers conclude there was changes in the brain, functional changes in the brain. Those changes was a dampening down of the default mode network. So you know that network that we're always going somewhere else? It was clear that that network was being dampened down, and also this pro-inflammatory interleukin 6 levels were lower. The interleukin 6, the benefits of that lower levels was still evident 4 months later. So 4 months after the retreat. Conclusion. Meditation. Meditation is used as a generic term to refer to a wide range of practices for the self-regulation of attention and emotion. It has 2 paths, the deep and the wide, with the former focusing on the deep exploration of the mind towards a profound alteration of our very being, and is usually part of a total lifestyle. While the latter involves the more practical application of meditation, it covers a wide spectrum of watered-down versions of the deep path, to mindfulness-based stress reduction taught in thousands of clinics, to minutes-long meditation apps. Meditation techniques are gaining in importance in medicine and healthcare, shown to be effective in a wide variety of clinical conditions, including pain management, stress and anxiety reduction, and in treating depression, particularly severe depression. Research is focusing on potential mechanisms of action. First reports on models of the underlying molecular principles and neurobiological foundations are evolving. Meditative experiences are rooted not only in psychology, but in neuroscience, neurobiology, and genetics. They can be detected at the level of brain in functional and structural changes, for example, greater functional connectivity between the prefrontal cortex, in managing emotion and areas of the amygdala that react to stress. At the level of biomolecules with increased melatonin, serotonin, dopamine, and reduced cortisol and pro-inflammatory cytokines. At the genetic level, in terms of boosting the activity of genes involved in several processes beneficial to health, both over the short and long term. Scientific research into meditation over the past 40 years is helping to breach the conventional Western medicine mind-body divide. These novel neurological and molecular insights not only bridge mind and body, but also East and West. Thank you.